Welcome to the free Scarlett skirt pattern. It's part of the vintage collection, and I'm going to show you here how you make this double layer skirt. If you want to make it with me, just grab your pattern from frocksandfrolics.com and I'll show you all the techniques here, how to gather your skirt, how to attach a waistband and then elasticate it. Loads of little tips and tricks here for all your beginners, and you can get to know Frocks and Frolics as you go. So without further ado, let's get started and make this wonderful little skirt. I've chosen some ribbon for embellishment. The fabric is from Michael Miller, the Rosalinda collection. There's a link to that fabric in the description as well. And let's just look at the pieces I've cut out. You need 2 pieces on the fold for the upper skirt. And then I would suggest that you use the stunner fabric for the top layer, and then you have a plainer fabric like a stripe or polka dot or just plain for the lower layer. The waistband is cut twice, and let's have a quick look here at the lower layer. It's just a very simple stripe, also cut on the fold. Dead easy. This is perfect for all you beginners, and rickrack will go on to the upper layer of my skirt, and then on the lower layer I sewed the ribbon, and I think it's a really nice combination. And of course you need elastic 3 to 4 centimeters in width. When you've printed off your free pattern, then you need to check that the scale is 5 centimeters or an inch to make sure that you print it off correctly. It is just rectangles, but I'm sure you will appreciate a pattern regardless of that. And the way they go together is just in alphabetical order. You put A to B and C to B, and you just sellotape them together. So it's very, very simple for you to do, especially if you're a beginner. And that is your first pattern with Frocks and Frolics, a very good way to start. Now I've got all 3 pieces cut out, I can actually get cracking here. The first thing I need to do is to serge the edges of my waistband, and then we're going to sew the waistband together first, and we're going to sew it together with a 1 centimeter seam allowance on either side. Line up the fabric edge on edge and then just go for that 1 centimeter. There we go. Lock in your stitches at the beginning and the end, and then we're going to do the other side as well. And now we can pop on over to our ironing board and iron our seam flat first, and then we iron it apart. It's a habit that I would just get into. Just do that every time and you get beautiful seams. I do the same on the other side. And there we go, all done. Next we're going to work the tunnel for the elastic. The first thing we want to do is iron over the top edge 1 centimeter, and then we're going to turn it over to create the tunnel. For smaller children I would use a 3 centimeter or an inch and a quarter elastic, and for older children maybe you want to use a 4 centimeter width here. This is what I am using, and then your tunnel needs to be a centimeter more. So for my 4 centimeter I needed to make it 5 centimeters wide. So now I'm hopping over here to my ironing board and just ironing over the edge by 1 centimeter. And then I fold it down and get my trusty tape measure out, so make sure that I iron it in correctly, and I'm going to go for that 5 centimeter because my elastic is 4 centimeters wide, and I make sure it's the same everywhere. You do, and then you just iron that in. I check here again, 2 inches, 5 centimeters, good press. And now I can put a few pins in here, and I also need to leave a turning gap when I top stitch this. So I'm marking it. You don't really need to mark it unless you're bound to forget that you need to leave that opening gap. And now I'm going to sew from this side here all the way around, close to the edge, to the other point. I'm going to lock in my stitches on either side. And I line up the edge of the fabric that's folded in with the red marking on my presser foot. And if you haven't got a presser foot which has got that clear plastic in the middle, I would actually get myself one of those. It's gonna just make your life a lot easier. Keep it steady. And if it starts to push, you can see it here. The other thing that you can do is just hold it taut with your left hand all the way to the end here, lock in your stitches, and your tunnel is done. The stitching should be nice and even, and I would use stitch length 2.5 for this, or 3. Both will do. And we can now move on to the skirt. First we're going to close the side seams, and I'm going to close them together in one go and then serge them, but of course you could also serge the edges first and then sew it together, just like we did on the waistband. That's up to you and depends on the thickness of your fabric. My fabric is light enough to do it in one, so that's what I'm going to do. You also want to put the right sides together for your lower layer skirt, and then we're just gonna sew the sides together. So hop on over to your sewing machine, 1 centimeter seam allowance again, and I didn't even pin this. There is no need to pin these. Put the next bit straight under it. No problem, don't waste any thread, and we go straight down. Very, very simple skirt. I hope that you enjoy making this skirt, and we'll get a real taste for the rest of the vintage collection, which is all available on frocksandfrolics.com. We're really excited about it. We worked on it for about half a year, and they are really lovely pieces, from blouses to those wonderful high-waisted trousers. You're gonna enjoy making every single one of them. I've blended in my little models there, so all the way through you can see what else there is in the collection. We want to serge it now, all 4 side seams. And then we're going to iron those seams into one direction. So here's my underskirt. So I'm going to iron one side away from me and one side towards me. And then I'm going to do exactly the same on the main fabric, but when I put them together later, I want them to go into the opposite direction so that I get a really nice flat seam. I'll do the other side as well. If you think you're going to get that confused, well then just serge the edges first and then sew them together and iron the seam apart. Now we're going to turn up the hem, and on this one I'm just going to iron over the edge 1 centimeter and then turn it up at the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you how that works. And for the lower layer I'm going to do all of it on the sewing machine without even ironing anything first. So see what you want to do. As a beginner, I would always iron the first edge over. Alternatively, you could also serge that edge and then just turn it up. You can do that too. Now on the sewing machine, I'm going to fold it over my 2 centimeters and then put my presser foot down. It's very important that you have your tape measure around your neck so that you can measure what you're doing. So put it on so you've got that marker again of your clear presser foot on the edge of the fabric, or you could choose a mark on your needle plate. Make sure that you measure the 2 centimeters and then go to that point, stop. Turn it over again, what you think is 2 centimeters. Take your tape measure and check that it actually is. Hold it nice and taut and then do the next bit. And everyone that has been sewing for a very long time will hardly need to measure this at all. If you're a beginner, this is how it's done. Right, fold it over again, measure the 2 centimeters and then hold it at that point and then straighten it out neatly, and then just go close to the edge all the way up. So it's not actually difficult. Once you've done this a few times, you won't be pinning anything like that, because it takes so much time, and I think it's just, well, don't want to do it. Right, now for the underskirt or the lower layer skirt, I'm just going to turn it up 2 centimeters as well, and in 1 centimeter. So there's 2 ways you can do this straight on the sewing machine. You could turn it up 3 centimeters to begin with, so that you know that's the right distance, and then just turn in the top to the 2 centimeter point. And that's quite a simple way to do as well. Use your finger to put in your seam allowance, and with stripes it's particularly easy to see that you're doing it right, because the stripes will line up with each other, and if you start doing it wrong, they will no longer line up. And I do that all the way around, and there you go. You can see I don't necessarily always measure. I just quick check, you know, is it still 2 centimeters? If it is, go, go, go. Now you could leave it like that and give it a jolly good press, but I'm going to put my rickrack on. And what I'm going to do is just use that stitching line as my guide. If you think that's too close to the edge, you could have always serged the edge of the hem, and then your rickrack would sit a little bit higher. I think in the case of the ribbon, that would have been nicer. So if I made it again, I'd probably serge the edge and then put the rickrack a little bit higher, and also the ribbon. So what you want to do is put your rickrack exactly on that seam line, and what will happen is that you will go with a straight standard stitch all the way through, and you won't see that stitch. There's no need to do a zigzag stitch on this. You know, I don't think it's necessary at all, and I'm just going straight through, just placing it on there as I go. And at the end, you just cut it off so it overlaps a little bit. Turn in that rickrack, secure your stitches, and voila, you've got a really, really beautiful hem. That looks really nice. That's it. Cut off the threads. And now we're going to do the ribbon. Same thing applies. I would, though, say try to go so that your stitch line sits on the edge of the ribbon, because the 2 centimeters I think did look a bit proxy, I have to say. So although it's very pretty, I want you to get the absolute perfect result. So if you serge the hem, then you can move it up a little bit further, and the stitching line should be on the outer edge of that right side that we're doing there. So you line that up all the way around. At the end, you cut it off and turn it in again. I think I cut it off a little bit more there, because it was a little bit long. There we go. And then we'll just go over the edge, secure it, and then sew down the other side. Same way. And you may want to stretch the fabric as you're going there. When you iron it, you want to really stretch the fabric, and if you've done a really good job, whoop, I've came off there a little bit, but it should be on the same stitching line as before, as you can see here. And that is all the hems done now. So before we put the skirt onto the top, you want to make sure that the distances are the same, especially as a beginner. You might have made a mistake. It might not be all that even. You might have cut out a bit wonky. Who knows? Anyway, you want to measure it so it's all the same. In my case, I cut a little bit off to make it 28 centimeters because I wanted it to be a tiny little bit shorter. Then you mark the center back and the center front. You've put the side seams on top of each other, and so you know where to mark it. Same goes for the upper skirt. Put all the edges on top of each other. Quickly check that you have made no mistake. And in this case, I didn't need to trim anything off. Now we do the same again. We will mark the center front and the center back with a small little snip. Beautiful. And now we can put the lower skirt inside the upper skirt. So it's really simple, and I hope all you beginners here will say, wow, this is a really nice skirt. And because it's free, you can just make it. You just go to our shop, you purchase it for free, and that will also give you access to the academy. And we also got loads more videos on the academy for you to learn how to sew. We've got a sewing 101 course, first steps, which is also free. All the sewing courses, apart from the stuff that is related to a pattern, are absolutely free. So you can just watch them whether you're logged in or not. I just want you to sew properly, and that is my mission. So you want to make sure that the seam allowances lie into opposite directions so that the seam is nice and flat, just like this. Now I'm going to put in gather threads. I'm actually not overpinning this at all because I'm going to sew them in now. And one of my tips would be to use different color threads for the upper thread and the bobbin thread. Very important. And spot my error here. What is Marina doing? She isn't leaving a long thread hanging. I was on autopilot. So what you want to do is leave 2 long threads hanging. Set your machine to the longest stitch length available, and then sew all the way around. And that will take a while. And you see why it wasn't important at all to pin any of this. No need. Just grab the center or the side seams and then just keep going. And when you get to the end, you want to leave a long thread hanging. Again, there we go. Not a short one. And then we are going to go foot width from that again, so that when we're stitching it together with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, we actually sit directly in the middle. Now if you have a really thick fabric or you're using linen for the top and the lower layer, I wouldn't recommend that you put both layers together. I would just gather the top layer, and the lower layer you can just put random pleats into it all the way around. That will make it a load flatter, and therefore it will be much easier to work with. My lower layer is a very lightweight fabric, so I could do the layers together. So see what kind of fabric you're working with before you decide how to do that. And if you're unsure, I show how that method works in my flower girl dress. It's my method I've used every time I made a flower girl dress, because I had a lot of density and I didn't want it to be thick with the lining as well. Go. And there's a link to the flower girl dress as well in the video description to this. There we go. Now we can put together our waistband, so that needs to be right side out. And now we're going to attach the skirt, so turn the skirt inside out and then mark the center front and center back of your waistband if you haven't done that already. There we go. And now I just need to line up my side seams. I also do the center front and center back here, but you will see in a minute. Actually, you won't, because I cut out all the gathering because it took so long. But you need to put the seams of the side seams on top of each other, and then we're just going to gather from one side to the other both ways, and then we're going to put the pins back into the center front and back as well. Basically, it's a very dense gather all the way across. There you go. Right now, this is the point where I realize I haven't got left a long thread. I'm going, what is this? Where is it? So I had to pick it out and pull it first and then pull it together. So that's not what you want. Leave a long thread hanging so that you don't have any trouble pulling it, because you need to wrap it around your fingers, don't you? And then we're just pulling it along, and this will take you about 10 minutes, I should think. So I just turned the camera off in a minute because it was just arduous. You don't want to sit here for 10 minutes and see me pushing this along. But the one thing that I did do, I just mentioned that already, I took out the pin in the center front and the center back, because actually it was really hard to go over the pin. If you have just one layer in there, then it's fine, you can just go over it. But if you're working with the 2 layers, then you really want to take that pin out, push all the gathers to the other side seam, then pull the gather threads from the other side again to the side seam, and that's it, basically all done. I set myself into the shade because in my studio it was so hot. I said, right, that's it. I'm sitting in the breeze and the shade to gather this. And then I came back in. Right, so make sure you push these over, not too brutally. You don't want that thread to rip. That would be awful. And now I've put them all on and pinned them in. And now I can just go over to the sewing machine and sew through the center of my gather threads, and that will be it. Skirt attached, and it looks really, really nice. As you can see, we have a very nice dense gather, and then we'll just put the elastic in the top and skirt finished. So just make sure that the underside, which is your waistband, is really nice and flat, and that you don't end up having a pleat in there. That's quite important. Apart from that, it's really very simple. I usually also arrange my gathers a little bit better with a little pin while I do this, but the gathers were so dense that they had nowhere to go really, so I'm just banging those together now really quickly. It's a super quick skirt, even if you put on, you know, lace and ruffle. If you want, you could put another ruffle on, or like I did, I put on rickrack and a ribbon. So, you know, sky's the limit with this. And then we want to overlock it. I want to make very sure that you realize that you may still have some vertical pins in there where you attach the seams or the center front, so you make sure that you take those out. Really, really important, people. Many times I have used the overlocker or serger and the knife went over the pin, and it's a £30 in England, and I think probably $40 mistake, and that's a little bit expensive. So make sure you have no pins in there at all. And then we want to remove the lower gather thread, and this is why it's so handy if you have 2 different colors, because it's really obvious which one you have to pull out. So you just pull it out from one end, cut it at the other end, and then you can just pull the thread out, and look, the top thread will come off really easy. So the technique here is, let's do this again. You just cut it a little bit ways over, and then you grab that lower thread and you yank it, but in a like a stop go motion, and take it out, and that will ensure it doesn't rip, and you can pull it out real easy. That's my beginning again. Cut it a little bit further in, grab that thread, stop start motion, perfect. And then you can just lift off the thread. If you don't have 2 layers, you can pull the bobbin thread out in one, all looking absolutely stunning. Now I could just iron this, but because it's quite thick, I'm going to top stitch it. So I will force the fabric apart like that, and then I'm going to top stitch it close to the edge with a stitch length of 3 or 3.5. You always want a longer stitch length, that looks not so homemade. Pull it apart and then follow whatever mark you have on your presser foot that you think looks really good. I always have that same red line on mine, so it's totally ingrained. If you find it sort of kind of wobbles a little bit by pulling apart and you won't get it really neat, the other thing that you can do is grab it from one side like that, and then use your left hand to pull it down a bit, and that makes it straighter. So both is fine. If you have the one layer gathered and one pleated, this won't be an issue for you at all in the first place, but for all of those that work exactly like I do here, try both methods, see what works best for you. There we go. Don't forget to lock in your stitches at the end. And guys, we're almost finished. Yippee-doo. Now you never want to put your iron on it. You want to flatten it with your hand. It looks very homemade if you just leave those gathers standing out. If you buy something from the shop, you'll notice that they're always a little bit flattened, but you only want to use steam and then put your hand on it, and that'll give you a really beautiful finish. You get the volume in the hem and you don't get the volume at the top. Actually, that is not so pretty. It can look really crumpled. I don't know how to say that in English. So, right, there we go. Skirt is looking absolutely stunning. And the last thing we need to do is to put in our elastic. So I've got my 4 centimeter elastic and I'm going to thread that through the tunnel. Now, if you're doing a skirt for a 3 to 4 year old or even a 5 to 6 year old, I think it is a little bit wide for them. So you would want to use a 3 centimeter or 1.25 inch elastic, and that will look great. So I'm moving it all the way around. Make sure that it doesn't slip accidentally through on the other side. And then I pull it through the other end. And we're going to put those 2 ends on top of each other, flat. And I'm putting in 2 pins, which are horizontal because we're going to sew vertical. So I can leave them in. And I just sew over them on either side, normal stitch, no zigzag required or anything like that. And also this is easy to adjust if you want to make it a bit tighter or a bit looser in the future. This is really quite simple. Now that's done, we just need to close the turning gap, and you can see how there is only very little gather. And I think that's brilliant, because if you wanted the skirt to be a little bit longer, just go for a bigger size and elasticate more. And now we're just going to do the closing of the turning gap. And I've moved up my elastic a little bit and pinned it, as you can see there, so that it wouldn't slip in and I accidentally sew it in with, you know, my seam. And that's it. We have finished our beautiful skirt. I hope you really enjoyed this, all the little techniques that you've learned here. And if you're a beginner, this is really fab. You want to move out all your gathers now from the lower layer to make it look really nice and voluminous in the hem. And that's it. Look at how beautiful that looks. Absolutely gorgeous. But you can see what I mean about the serging. You could use serging for the hem and then have the rickrack and your ribbon a little bit higher. Don't forget, there's a whole collection, and thank you to my models. Here is Magdalena modeling the crop top. That's Connie and Bonnie. Then we have little Lily and Magdalena again modeling the Audrey, which fit great regardless of age. Here we got Betsy, either with a hem trim or without. It's really lovely too with the Tilly crop top. And here we've got the piece de la resistance. I love this blouse. It's Beatrice again with a puff sleeve, this time borrowed from our Western blouse. And here we got the lovely Charlize, and she is modeling the Betsy skirt and the Beatrice blouse, and it's just right for twirling. And here we've got Charlotte modeling the Scarlett skirt and the Beatrice blouse. And here we've got Lily again with the Francis skirt and the Connie crop top. And here we've got Charlize again in another Francis skirt and Tilly top. And again, Isaria was very busy making these tops and skirts. This is the Bonnie skirt and the Connie top again, and she couldn't help herself and she made another Beatrice with a Francis skirt because her daughter Charlize just absolutely loves this. So I'm hoping to see you soon at frocksandfrolics.com and join the fun of the vintage collection. See you soon. Bye for now.